Thank you everybody for joining us. Good evening. We're connecting to you from Seattle, so thank you for bearing with us with the virtual setup here. We're going to spend our time today answering questions, some that you have submitted ahead of time, and then as said earlier, feel free to ask questions as we go along as well. We'll start by introducing ourselves. My name is Alden Kroll, and I'm a designer here at Valve. I work on a lot of the features on Steam, including the store, and also the backend publishing tools that you all make use of as you prepare your games for release. So these kinds of sessions and the questions that you ask are really helpful for us to figure out how to prioritize what we work on and hear what is important to you and what kind of features and things that you have in mind that are of importance to you. Tom, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Alden. My name's Tom Giardino. I've worked at Valve for just under 10 years now, and I sit on the Steam business team. So my job really revolves around two different aspects. The first thing is developer relations like this, chatting with studios and publishers to help them find success on Steam. And that can mean everything from the nuts and bolts operational stuff to, setting up a publisher sale or helping, if a game has a successful launch and it's, doing an extra promotion, all the way up to sort of managing our relationships with outside entities and AAA studios and everything in between. The other part of my job really revolves around the store and the platform, working with people like Alden and programmers and developers at Valve to be a voice for developers and figure out what new features and tools we can add to the platform in a way that'll benefit both the people making games, all of you, and all of your customers who are, buying and playing games on Steam. And in that role, there's a few different things like, that we really think about. And Alden and I wanted to spend a couple of minutes talking before we transition to some of your questions to just describe a little bit of, how Steam is going and what some of our philosophies and goals are. It's been a really big 5 years for the platform in terms of growth. There was a time not that long ago in 2016, 17, 18, where we were really excited to be hitting milestones like 15 million concurrent users or 20 million concurrent users being on Steam all at the same time. In the last couple of years, that number has swelled to having 25, 28, 29 million people online on Steam at the same time. A lot of growth there is driven from regional growth on Steam. And, we'll talk a little bit more about that in the context of some of your questions. But a big benefit to Steam's expansion over time has been, adding more users from new countries and building better platform support. And again, I'll talk more about that in detail later on. Another big driver, of course, of that growth was the pandemic. I think that's true for most video game platforms. A really interesting test for us was, will users stick around? Will customers continue to engage in the platform after, maybe they showed up to buy Among Us at the start of the pandemic, and are they still here, 2 years later? And that has held true. We're really excited with how many new customers have joined Steam, and in really narrow periods of time, even like a period like the Steam summer sale, which is about 2 weeks long and just ran in June and July. One of the things we look at is new first-time customers. So those are accounts that have been created and then go on to buy and play a game or make a microtransaction in a free-to-play game. And so we added well north of 1 million first-time customers just in that window of time, in that 2 weeks of the summer sale that just ran. So those are new users who are showing up for the very first time to participate in the Steam ecosystem. We think that kind of growth is really important. The other thing we wanted to talk about, though, is the growth of developers. So I'm going to plug one of our monthly, announcements that we make as a business and platform team. Every month we do a top 20 releases on Steam announcement, and that tracks the most successful new launches on Steam, and also the top 5 most played new free-to-play games, games coming out for the first time. And we do this every month, and you can sort of look back in our archives on the Steam store. If you just Google, Steam top 20 May 2022, or anything like that, or we can share a link after the talk, or post it on Twitter. Those are really interesting resources for developers to look at if you're trying to get a sense of the growth and change of Steam. Because every month, for one thing, the variety of the games finding success on Steam is, kind of startling. In the last month, we had Soundfall, which was sort of like a dungeon crawling rhythm game. Captain of Industry, a really traditional, simulation base building game. Songs of Conquest, which was a turn-based strategy game. And, the list goes on and on. Every month, we post all those games as a way of sort of showing to the developer community and the customer community what's popular on Steam, what's finding success. And we also write a brief blog post sharing some details of like, hey, here's some highlights we've noticed, here's trends that are developing, congratulations to so-and-so. And that can be a really good resource. So if you're just trying to wrap your head around like, how do I find success on Steam? What games are resonating with players? What trends are developing? Looking at that top 20 list every month is a good way of seeing the diversity and the depth. It's developers from all over the world. It's game mechanics from a huge variety of corners of the industry. And it's also new devs. Every month we shout out the developers who are releasing their first ever product on Steam. And usually that's, 4 or 5 or 6 of the 20 games. So that's a long intro, but hopefully a way of framing some of the questions that we answer and some of our goals. We really think about Steam as a platform that's valuable in the context of connecting game makers and game players. We want to build, a platform that gives games the best version of the experience. So if you could play a game anywhere, elsewhere on PC or on your Switch or on an Xbox or wherever, we want to build tools and features that help it make Steam be the best version of that game and the least friction between you and what you want to play. So that's a big round summary. There's one more thing I'm going to say in this intro that's a piece of advice. No one asked this question exactly, but a lot of people asked questions kind of close to it of like, how do I find my customers, or what's the best way to market my game, etc. Really common questions we hear all the time. I wanted to encourage everybody in the room listening to make sure that you are being a subject area expert on the kind of game that you're releasing. Here's what I mean by that. If you're building a tower defense game, it can be tempting, or sometimes you fall into the trap of just putting your head down and working on your own game, thinking about how do I market my game, what are customers going to do in my game, and you're really focused on that product. And that's okay, but be sure that every month you're picking your head up and looking at the landscape of games in general. Steam makes this really easy to do. There's lots of other resources and platforms as well that you want to check this out on. But if you were making a tower defense game, make it a part of your weekly, workflow, or your weekly routine to go check out the Tower Defense Hub on Steam. We map everything out really clearly. Here's the most popular new releases that just came out. Here's the most anticipated upcoming games. Here are the top selling games in this category. So if you were trying to build a tower defense game and you wanted to find commercial success or resonate in the market, there's your market research. Now, on a weekly basis, you can look to see what kinds of games are successful. What languages did they choose to localize in? What features are they embracing? What are customers saying about them in feedback or reviews, positively or negatively? What are people enjoying or not enjoying about this product? Because I think really paying attention to what games are finding success can help you. Not that you need to go out and follow a blueprint that somebody else did word for word, but it's really important to understand and be familiar with your niche of the market, your segment of the market, so that you can make good decisions for your customers. Alden, is there anything you want to add to that long wall of text, or should I transition into kind of our opening questions here?
I think that was a great introduction and great summary. And I think we can start jumping into some of the questions that you all asked ahead of time. So I'll go ahead and set up the first one for Tom here. We had a couple of people ask, how do pre-purchases work for games on Steam? How does a game qualify? So, with questions like this, we're going to get kind of into the nuts and bolts of how Steam works. And we're happy to get into these kind of level of details. And we're also happy to talk more about some of the kind of philosophical approach to how we operate a platform, as Tom was mentioning earlier. So feel free to ask questions like this of all kinds. So Tom, do you want to talk a bit about pre-purchases?
Yeah, definitely. So, the first thing we think about on running a pre-purchase or not is really like the customer perspective. We're a digital only store. So, pre-purchases come from a very old physical goods model where customers would be worried like, hey, don't run out of my copy of, Half-Life 2 on launch day. I want to get my disc. I want to be able to pick it up. And suppliers and storefronts wanted to forecast. Do I need to put 10,000 boxes into this market or 100,000 boxes? What do I need to do? Digital stores don't have those constraints. There's no way for us to run out of copies of a popular game on launch. And, there's the marginal cost of additional units is so different in the digital space. So we really ask ourselves, what's the benefit or upside to a customer if we ran this pre-purchase? Because putting money down now for a game that's going to come out months from now or might never come out, might get canceled, like that's not an optimal thing for most users most of the time, unless there's some really compelling incentive or upside. And there almost never is, right? To be totally honest. Sometimes there'll be a price discount, pre-purchase and get 10% off. Sometimes there's a content related discount of like, hey, if you pre-purchase, you get the season pass for free, or you get advanced access to the multiplayer beta. If there's some concrete upside like that to customers, that can make a pre-purchase a little more interesting. And our documentation says this as well. So if anybody's curious, you can go into Steamworks and sort of use it as your own Google or Wikipedia. If you type in a term like pre-purchase, you'll find our documentation article that'll restate some of this. But as we say there, pre-purchases can be kind of dangerous, especially for a medium-sized game or a smaller game, because one of the things they do is time shift revenue or sales away from your launch day. The math is never this simple, right? But let's just say if you could have 1,000 people buy your game, if they bought it all on the same day or in the same week, that gives you a much better chance of being, a popular new release or being on the top sellers chart. If those same 1,000 people buy your game at a rate of, 5 per day for many, many days leading up to your release in a slow trickle, that never really gives you any momentum or velocity, makes it really difficult for you to ever show up as a top seller or a popular new game if you've just been sort of trickling sales day by day, which is what we normally see for pre-purchases. The average sale curve for a pre-purchase is that almost nobody will buy it until the last couple of days before launch. So spreading out a bunch of those sales over a long period of time, day by day by day, really hurts your chances of a successful launch day. So we tend to discourage people from running pre-purchases. If it was up to the Valve business team, we probably never or very rarely run pre-purchases. It usually doesn't make sense. Sometimes we do so because the same game is available for pre-purchase, on the PlayStation or on some other PC store or whatever. So we'll try to like match those offers if they're providing a good benefit to customers. But pre-purchasing is not an interesting path. We don't give pre-purchases more marketing unless they're selling really well with customers, which is the thing that happens at launch anyway. So it's not a super interesting direction to go, but there are some baseline, expectations and things we look for. Customer interest is another big one, right? If the new Call of Duty is coming back to Steam and they've got a huge pre-purchase plan and incentive, yeah, we're kind of happy to run that. And there's a lot of customers who are, eagerly anticipating the next Call of Duty, but that model isn't very productive or easy to, recreate for most titles. And so in general, we'd advise against running them. Hope that made sense. The next question, I think we'll probably just move from question to question that were already submitted to us, unless the moderator in the room or if a question comes up or somebody wants to interject. Alden and I are happy to respond to follow-up questions if that's helpful for anybody. So that way you're not just listening to us talk on a giant screen for an hour. So if people do have follow-up questions, don't be shy to make those known via the moderator in the room. We're happy to respond. But if there aren't any, I will move to the next question, which I think Alden is going to cover. So this question was about UTM tracking, which some of you may or may not be familiar with. The root question is, what kind of tracking is available for developers to measure the effectiveness of any marketing campaigns? And does Valve have any plans in that area? Alden, you can talk about that, I think.
Yeah, I can cover this real quick. So we have been working on integrating a system called UTM tracking that helps developers be able to measure the impact of any external or specific external traffic that is directed to your Steam store page. And so if you hook up your marketing campaigns or your website links or any kind of external activity that you're doing with the special UTM code, then Steam can track those customers through to wish list or through to purchase actions at the end of that funnel. So there's definitely still some room for improvement. This system is in a current beta, and we're working on a number of additions and improvements to the system. But as with any other kind of feature in Steam, we have to follow paths of especially information tracking that adheres to our privacy policies and the principles of confidential information. So there's definitely a lot of other kinds of tracking systems out there that we think are not a good solution for customer privacy and things like that. So UTM is the solution that we are settling on and building out and working on. So definitely, as Tom was mentioning, our documentation on a lot of these things is really quite comprehensive. So feel free to take a search for that in the Steamworks documentation. There's a lot of details in there on that topic. There was another question in the order of things that I think we skipped over, which is somebody had an interesting question about Steam Labs. And really kind of wondering, how we make use of that and how we ensure that that's a useful, productive system. So I would love to talk about this because I've worked on Steam Labs a lot. It is kind of our experimental place for new store features. And, it's really trying to solve this problem where we operate this platform with hundreds of millions of monthly active users, and people are online all the time, and really, it can be really disruptive if we make big changes to the platform suddenly and unexpectedly. And we don't always have 100% confidence that the changes that we're working towards are the right ultimate solution. So Steam Labs is a place where we can introduce new features and get a chance to test them out with customers and developers. Because frankly, operating a platform like Steam, we have to pay attention to how things impact both customers and developers like you making games and selling games on Steam. So Steam Labs gives us kind of a safe place to launch those things, lets people opt into new features, try them out, give us feedback. The interesting thing is that, as Tom was mentioning earlier, as the diversity of games has grown over the years and the number of players over years, we have just so many different customers with so many different interests and levels of engagement with the platform. And we see that diversity continue into the Steam Labs experiments as well. And so we get a lot of feedback and usage data from people with all kinds of different tastes and interests, people that show up to Steam once a month, people that show up to Steam every single day. These are all things that help give us confidence in the new features that we're building, either whether to continue down the path that we are going on or to change direction and really modify whatever the experiment is. So if you haven't checked it out before, at the top of the Steam store page, that blue bar of navigation, there's a button there for labs. Check it out. Those are our current ongoing experiments. And we've been, I don't know, launching maybe one every month or every other month or so. And the length of them kind of depends on what the feature is and how much work we realize that we have to do. But it has been a really helpful way of developing features with the feedback and input of both players and developers.
Yeah, the other thing I think about in the context of Steam Labs, and especially because of the person who asked this question, is thinking about, hey, who are the Steam users anyway? What games do they play? What are they interested in? Does this even make sense for them? One way of thinking about it is, on one hand, you have a customer who buys like one game a year. They're either because of time constraints or budget constraints or what they're into, right? Somebody who's a really hardcore Skyrim modder and spends 1,000 hours a year in Skyrim and doesn't buy that many other games, that customer is adding a bunch of value to Steam and is great, and we want them to be happy. But when they go to shop the store, they're not necessarily going to be super familiar with, what new games have come out lately or what's popular. So they might want a totally different tool to go shop for games or look for content. As opposed to a customer who's super involved, spends all day on Discord and Twitter talking about games, tries out every new game. Maybe they also subscribe to Game Pass and they get free games on Epic and they're like, using new games all the time. That customer has a very different set of expectations and needs compared to that other user who might only buy one or two games an entire year. And so there are, I think, a lot of features and tools in Steam and Steam Labs that aren't necessarily in parallel. The person who really loves clicking through their discovery queue every single day, not everybody on Steam is going to do that. So discovery queue is really useful for the people who use it. And there's going to be other customers who never touch it. And that's okay. We don't have the, I think, as opposed to maybe Netflix or like Spotify, where the pattern of usage is a lot more similar across customers. On Steam, games are just too different from one another. They're not like music or TV shows. And the way that people interact with games is so different. So having features that only a small portion of the customer base find useful, that's okay, because even if only a few percentages of active users engage with that feature, that's still, millions of people every month. So that's another reason why some Steam Labs might, you might scratch your head and think, why, who's this for? I'll never use that. And that's okay. We're realistic that many of these features are not one size fits all. They're not going to be a perfect fit for every single gamer on Steam.
Okay, we have a question from the audience. First question.
Great.
Hello, Tom. Hello. My name is Alexander Miselevich. I was publishing few titles on Steam. It's Drunk or Dead VR, Hell Road VR, and a few more. Tom, you were talking about that we have different users and that we must know our audience. And I was wondering if Steam plans to add some tools to developers to understand their audience better, because at the moment we know only the location where they bought our game, and I think that's it. But we have different genders, different ages, different amount of games. Maybe we can tell which games are played by our customers and so on. By the way, thank you for. Okay, I'm just thinking.
Yeah, no problem. Alden, I have a couple thoughts on that, so I can start if it's okay with you. It's a really good question. One unique challenge with Steam is that we, by design, never gather demographic data about our customers. So we don't track, and I think another question someone asked in advance has some overlapping topics with this, but we don't gather the traditional demographic data like, gender or age or anything like that. When somebody signs up for Steam, they just check a box that they're over the age of 13. That's kind of our terms of service. But beyond that, we don't ask for or try to gather other info. And so as a result, I think some platforms, especially on mobile, that are really data centric like that, where you can get a report that says, oh, most of your customers are women aged 35 to 50. We, by design, don't gather that info about our customers. Like Alden said earlier, our privacy policy looks pretty different from most online stores and e-commerce. We have a very different relationship with customers around that stuff. So that is one, limitation. That data just isn't available to developers because we don't gather it. The other side of the fence in terms of seeing what other games your players play, I think those are really interesting ideas. Alden might have more to add on this, but one of the questions we ask ourselves is sort of what decision would a developer make differently if they had a certain data point, or what would you change? Would you update your game at a different cadence? Would you add a feature that you didn't have? And I can see how some of that data that you were asking for might really impact your design decisions or marketing decisions. So that's an interesting suggestion. Alden, have you thought more about that?
Once I was working on the project where dragons shoot lasers, and the top of our players were women from in age from 12 to 21. It was a fun fact to discover, and yes, maybe knowing what other games our audience play may let us know about something like that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you for your question. We have been putting thought into the kinds of aggregate data that would be useful for game developers. It is a thing that is kind of ongoing in the background. We don't have concrete plans to announce for that just yet, but the more kind of feedback and especially specific actionable requests that come from game developers that said, oh, if I knew this kind of information, I would be able to make this kind of decision. Those kinds of things would be really helpful. So if any of you out there get the chance, even just submitting a support ticket with those kinds of requests, those things get bubbled up to us on the business team, on the design team, on the product team. Those are all really helpful for us to inform our future decisions and what we work on. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
And also I will put some question nearby because I have also a list of new questions, and one of them asking about the geographical data of audience. So it's very similar to what you are talking, but it's not the age or gender, but it's about the geographic. Do you have some plans to collect and share it with developers?
What was that specific request you said at the end there? I missed that.
The question is, I will write you how it's plan. Do you plan to introduce geographic analytics in the traffic report? That's the question. I
guess that's a fairly easy answer as Tom described. We don't collect demographic data, so that is not something that we're even able to share in any of the reports. So that is a limitation with how we have Steam set up and our relationship with customers. But yeah, so it's not possible to share that information as we don't collect that from customers.
Okay, and we have another question from the audience. Go on.
Oh, okay. Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Nice to meet you, first of all. So I have a question from Ed Field, if you don't mind. So the story was back in October, Mark Zuckerberg made a big announcement of renaming to Meta, and then he created a hype around metaverses, NFT, and right at that time, Steam said a strict no to NFT games and blockchain projects. So it's past almost a year now, right? So my question is, are your policies changing now a little bit? Because, for example, Epic Games made, a step forward to that, or NFT games are still, or like NFT is still a black seal, black stamp that you would say, no, we are not allowing that because it's connected to some tricky ways of laundering money, yada yada. And if yes, so do you have some maybe quality threshold that you would say, yeah, this project, even though it includes NFTs, but it's good to go on our platform?
Yeah, no changes to the policy planned. To be honest, Alden and I don't have a ton of direct expertise with some of the legal and regulatory topics that led to that decision. So I don't have a ton of deep info or nuance to share about it, but no changes planned or expected. Sorry, thanks for asking though.
Thanks.
And another question.
Yeah. Hi guys, Oleg Chomakov here from Luden.io, developers of Wild True Learn. Nice seeing you, really. Thanks for joining this conference. Since we are focused on educational video games, I was really wondering about Chromebook support, which were announced a while ago. And could you please elaborate a bit about what is your plans for that? Probably schools will join this adventure of Steam on Chromebooks. Thank you.
It's a really good question. Over the years at Valve, I've spent a few different times trying to figure out ways to make Steam and Steam games more accessible for schools. There's a lot of barriers there. I'm mostly familiar with the barriers here in the United States, but I think they're relatively consistent from country to country. In terms of Steam on Chromebooks, Alden, you might have more expertise here to share, but I think a lot of it is adjacent to our work on Steam Deck and Proton. Basically this, as probably most of you are familiar with, Proton is this compatibility layer that tries to make, the Windows build of a game run smoothly and efficiently, even on a machine that's not running Windows, on a Linux machine, kind of like what Steam Deck already is. So there's a lot of, obvious goals for us of saying, hey, what if we could make every game on Steam, more valuable and more accessible for customers? And what if we could make Steam available to more customers and more devices? We think both of those are just inherently good. PC gaming has always moved in that direction towards being more open, more accessible, customers having the freedom to install and play content on the device of their choosing. So that's a direction, we just think benefits the whole PC ecosystem and PC developers in general. In terms of concrete updates of like, is a new announcement coming or is a new feature coming out, I honestly just don't work closely enough on any of that to say. I don't know, Alden, do you have more recent info on Proton related stuff or Chromebook stuff?
Yeah, I don't have a lot more to add except that I'm not aware of any particular initiative to make stronger inroads into schools in particular. I think the addition of things like Chromebook and other devices is really about giving players more choices about how they can play their games and on what devices they can play their games. So sorry we don't have better news for your educational games at this moment.
Yeah. Now, the only other thing I will say is we do have Steam site licensing, or the Steam PC Cafe program. That's been around for years, and schools do have access to Steam that way. However, it's kind of up to any individual school district or private school or college, et cetera, to interact with that program as they see fit. So some schools, wouldn't use it at all because it doesn't meet their technical requirements or isn't approved curriculum or whatever. But many schools are already using Steam site licensing and Steam PC Cafe. As a game developer, that's an important thing for you folks to think about, as well as the other developer who makes VR games. That's another area in which site licensing is really popular. So for like a VR arcade type of experience where I don't have, the money or space for a big VR setup, so I go to a VR arcade to play games. Within Steam, if you have an educational game that you think would be a good fit, or games that would be popular in PC cafes or VR games, you can opt those games into the site licensing program to sell commercial licenses. And that allows you to, sell in bulk to a VR arcade or a hospital or, any entity in the program. Once you opt your game in, it's available to any site licensee anywhere on the planet. So a PC cafe in Korea could buy 20 copies of your game. Or a hospital in Montreal could buy copies of your VR game if they have a VR, setup in their children's wing or whatever the case may be. That's not a huge revenue generator, to be candid with everyone, at this time. It's a pretty small portion of the overall Steam business, but it's an area that, is available and will probably continue to grow over time. And some schools do take advantage of it.
Thank you, guys. Nice seeing you.
Yeah.
And another question.
Hello again. And Tom, you mentioned VR arcade program I was wondering, maybe there is some kind of marketing tips for VR titles, because, well, I have experience with like 3 or 4 titles, and the program was not particularly working for them. Maybe there are some recommendations on how to improve the situation.
My data on this is relatively limited, but what I have seen is relatively, feast or famine. In other words, like, maybe Beat Saber and Space Pirate Trainer selling lots and lots and lots of units because those are these big recognizable names that people have seen their friends play, and relatively low commercial sales for, most other VR titles. I don't have a suggestion or solution in the immediate term there. I think VR is still such a small portion of the overall ecosystem that it has a little bit of a challenge. Almost like, I heard somebody compare it to the first few years of the Nintendo Switch, where, there was a handful of games that had really high attach rates. Like if you had a Switch, you almost definitely owned Mario Kart and Zelda, and you might not own hardly anything else. I think VR is maybe a little bit still in that space where there's a small set of titles that have really high attach rates. Everybody owns or plays that game, and doesn't branch out much from it. VR, of course, has the added challenge where I think a lot of the content hours are spent in Netflix and YouTube and other, non-game experiences. So I wish I had better advice for you on that front. It's definitely something I can imagine becoming more and more focused on by Valve over time as the VR ecosystem continues to grow.
Yeah, I thought maybe there can be some things to improve, maybe making a festival for commerce license users, or I don't know, free demo mode or something?
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting idea to run a promotion or some sort of event that's specifically targeting those site licensees. That's not something I've thought about very much before, but there are a couple people at Valve closer to the PC cafe business, so that's something we'll share with them.
Okay,
But
thank you.
yeah, a sale or an event targeted specifically for VR arcade, owners and runners is a neat idea.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Okay. There's a couple of questions Alden and I might pivot for a second and return to the list of pre-asked questions, just because there's a couple of topics I wanted to make sure we got to, and then we'll buzz through those and then switch back to taking public questions, if that's okay.
Okay, deal, because we are having some questions here, but also people waiting for the questions that they already sent you. Okay, so we're listening.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, go
on. So Alden, if it's okay, there was a question about audience that I actually think relates a lot to what we were just chatting about. So I might pick up that one. The pre-submitted question basically said, are there any plans for getting a younger audience to the platform? Many younger players haven't heard of Steam or don't use Steam. And that's a really interesting question. It's a thing we think a lot about, but we don't necessarily think about it in those same terms. For one thing, like Alden mentioned, and so did I, we don't actually record the traditional data. So we have never known and will never know, oh, our new users' average age is 16 or 25 or whatever. And we really don't think about it in that context. Instead, we kind of think about bringing people into the PC ecosystem in general. And it doesn't matter how they enter that space. So it's not about targeting a specific demographic. It's not about buying ads on a platform or anything like that. It's really about building a big inclusive platform and lowering the friction to allow developers to ship their games. Because what we find is it's really games that drive the audience and bring players in. How old they are isn't something we think a lot about. Instead, we think about, oh, here's somebody who maybe didn't have a reason to play games on computer before, or didn't have a reason to start a Steam account, and now they do. There's a couple of ways we approach that problem. The first one is something I talked about at the very beginning in the intro, which is like global growth. So we've seen for many, many years that if you want to grow in a new territory, supporting the language and the payment methods is sort of like, the baseline. You have to get that right. Otherwise, customers just don't have a way of engaging with your platform. So that's something we've steadily worked on for many years, adding new currencies and new payment methods to Steam. A lot of times supporting new payment methods in new territories is really expensive. So one of the most popular ones, especially for a young audience, people who might not have a credit card or a checkbook or whatever the case may be, is cash. So we sell Steam wallet cards all over the globe that a customer can walk into a MediaMarkt or a Walmart or a 7-Eleven and hand over a stack of bills and get back a Steam wallet card that they can redeem online. That's been a huge driver for new customers and new markets where cash is still a really popular payment method. Now that's a super expensive way for us overall. The fees associated with that kind of payment method are 10 to 15%. So it takes a bigger margin to be able to support that kind of payment method. But the trade-off is you get access to a bunch of customers and they can spend their money on a bunch of games. So even though it's a lot more expensive for us to accept a payment method like that compared to credit cards or PayPal or something, we still have worked really hard at investing and growing that business because it's such a valuable ad for developers. It's such a useful source of new customers that we choose to spend more on it. Another big piece of that puzzle actually is Steam Direct. Steam Direct is now about 5 years old. That's sort of our like self-publishing flow. So you can make a new account, get an app ID in Steam, start uploading builds, request Steam keys for testing, build your store page. You can go through the whole flow really quickly and with no friction from us. There's no curator or editor or regional director of sales or whatever at Valve that can that's gonna be a barrier to customers. And that's allowed a lot of games to ship on Steam very quickly in ways that they wouldn't ship on other platforms, where the barriers to entry are just too high to put your game onto some other PC stores or some console stores. A really good example of this, for us is these two recent games. One of them is called Muck and one of them is called Crab Game. This is a kind of a strange aside, but they're both made by somebody who is primarily like a YouTube content creator. His audience happens to be on the younger side, has a lot of fans who watch his videos and watch his content. And at some point, sort of as a side project, he decided to make a game and he put it on Steam, and it became very popular because there was this huge set of customers who followed him on YouTube, didn't really have, didn't spend a lot of time on Steam previously. And then once he started putting his games on Steam, they had, kind of a reason to show up. So that's a really specific example, but it happens all across the world all the time, right? A developer from Istanbul or Tokyo or Johannesburg can put their game on Steam quickly, bring their audience with them to Steam. And then once a customer's in the ecosystem, there's a whole bunch of awesome festivals and events and activities and promotions that can kind of like help somebody get invested and learn more about Steam and get involved. And then one of the last things is Steam Deck. Steam Deck is, of course, our handheld gaming PC. It runs Steam OS, but it's just a PC. So if you wanted to install Linux on it or your own, you wanted to install Windows or whatever the case may be, Deck right now is only sold in a small set of countries. It's mostly North America and Western Europe. But we will be expanding that to a bunch more countries soon. And we're also ramping up production. So right now, if you want a Deck, you basically have to wait in line. You can make a reservation and, in a few months or longer, you'll finally be able to get yours because, the demand far outstrips our ability to create decks. But that won't be true forever. We'll get better and better at producing them and make more and more of them and roll out availability into more and more countries. And we think Deck is a really interesting solution because its price point and its portability means a lot of people who might not think of themselves as a traditional PC gamer, with a giant 4K monitor and a keyboard and mouse, they might not play games that way, but a handheld device that feels a little bit more like a game controller is a great entry point into Steam. So over the next few years, we think a lot of people will become Steam customers via a Deck. Right now, most of the people buying decks, they're already Steam customers. They own a bunch of games on Steam. They're super fans. And it's just one more way for them to play their games. But it's easy to imagine, a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, Steam Deck being the entry point to being a PC gamer for the first time, even if it's not with a laptop or a traditional keyboard and mouse. It's a long-winded answer, but that was, a super interesting question and also touched on a bunch of the topics that people have since raised. So we definitely wanted to mention that. Alden, another question I wanted to make sure we got to was the one about events and fests. Would you mind talking about that for a minute?
Yeah, sure. So the question was generally, Steam Fests are great. Is Steam going to be doing more of these kinds of things? So definitely, we organize now 3 times a year Steam Next Fest, which is a great opportunity for your upcoming game to feature a demo, get it in front of customers, reach players that are interested in checking out games and trying them and giving you feedback along the way. We have found those to be really appealing both to customers and to game developers. And so we plan to keep running those 3 times a year as far as we can tell. So that we're definitely doing those. And then as you've probably noticed, we've started running more and more themed sale fests. And so these are more geared around released games, but where we pick a theme or genre, a tag, And we go really deep on exploring what are all the nuanced subgenres of this genre or this theme, and promoting that to customers. So we've done things like the Going Rogue sale, which is all about roguelikes and roguelites and Souls-likes and kind of adjacent genres there. We've done the Racing Fest, and then recently we just wrapped up the VR Fest. And then we have planned a number of other fests, and we're starting to build out our calendar for 2023 and planning what are the different genres, themes that we're going to work our way through and promote to customers. And these have been really amazing, both for customers and developers, a great way to get your game in front of customers, help educate customers about what these themes even are, especially for things like Going Rogue, for roguelikes where customers may not entirely understand the origins of the genre or what makes a roguelike, etc. So we plan to do a lot more of those, through the rest of 2022 and into 2023. So keep an eye out for invitations. We're looking at the games that logically fit into each of those themes and sending out invitations to the developers of those games. One of the ways that we're identifying that is through the tags that are applied to your game. So, one of the best things you can do both for the store in general and to make sure that you get invited to these events is to make sure that your game is tagged with all the appropriate applicable tags on Steam that apply to your game, the things that accurately describe what your game is and what makes it your game. From there, I think another really important question that we had ahead of time that Tom's going to address is, how does a refund policy work? Do we see abuse of that policy? Tom, you want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah, definitely. This is always a topic that devs are curious about. One thing I wanted to explain first is when a customer makes a refund on Steam, that's pretty expensive for Valve. We don't keep any portion of the revenue, so 100% of the payment goes back to the customer, and all of the transaction costs of that transaction fall on Valve alone. So it doesn't cost the developer anything, the customer gets all their money back, but Valve pays a lot of fees to support the transactions back and forth. The reason I bring that up is that's a good motivation for us to ensure that the refund policy, is working as intended for developers and isn't being abused, because abuse of the refund policy, would cost us a bunch of direct money, to say nothing of, just losing sales, missing out on revenue or purchases that a customer might have made. So it's important to us that the refund policy is respected and that developers are safe, because if the refund policy was getting abused in a way that was bad for developers, that would also be super bad for Valve. So our incentives are really well aligned with developers on that topic. General refund rates really vary. There are games on Steam with a 1 or 2% refund rate. There are games on Steam with a 10% refund rate, and a bunch of different factors impact that. One thing that can be surprising to people is frequently some of our most successful games sometimes have higher refund rates. A big driver of that is people, being excited about a game and wanting to play it and not necessarily understanding like what it is, or not doing their due diligence of, can my machine even run this game, etc. So when millions of people jump into Valheim because it has this huge, amazing early access launch, a lot of those customers, play 10 minutes of the game and realize, oh, like this is early access, it's not performing very well on my machine, or, oh, this isn't quite what I expected. I thought this was a different type of game. So sometimes more successful games that are really popular with customers and generate a bunch of revenue can also sometimes have slightly higher refund rates because people are taking more risks to buy them. Something that a lot of people don't necessarily realize. Another piece of the puzzle for refunds is, we want to have good customer service. We want users to have a good experience, because if they bought a game that they're not happy with, it's really it severely decreases the likelihood that they'll, keep investing time and money in Steam specifically and in games in general, right? So if you spend money and you get burned and you feel like, the game doesn't work or you're just not happy with your purchase after trying it out for half an hour, we want you to be able to get your money back, because then you can go and buy a game that you will be happy with and spend more time on. And that makes you a lot more likely to stick around as a player of PC games in the long term. So as frustrating as it can be for a developer to see that, oh, somebody refunded my game, ultimately, a useful way of thinking about it is, yeah, well, people are also refunding other titles on Steam and choosing to, buy your game instead. And that's a healthy ecosystem, one where people actually get what they want and they feel like they can trust, they can buy with confidence on Steam, because if something doesn't work out for them, they can get a refund and go find a different game to play. The last piece of the puzzle for us is really just paying attention to users. So we have this refund policy that has, pretty customer-friendly rules. After you buy a game, you can play it for a little while, about 2 hours, or, up to 2 weeks of owning it if you don't play it, and you can get your money back, kind of no questions asked. There are games that are much shorter than 2 hours. So one of the things we regularly look at is what's refund behavior for those titles. A few developers have spoke publicly about this over the years. Mike Bithell is one of them, who I think he's even put on his store page, like, hey, our game can be beat in about 45 minutes. We've never had refund problems because we think we're giving customers what they want and what they expect. So we're comfortable with this. He sort of shared some more public data points. But another piece of that puzzle is, on our side, individual customer behavior. So you can imagine a customer saying, oh, this refund policy, it's so friendly, I'll just use it to rent games. I'm going to buy a game, play it for 1 hour and 45 minutes and refund it, and then do that again and do that again. Well, as friendly as our customer service policy is up front, it's really easy for us to see when someone's requesting a refund what their history is. And it's also within our rights to just stop offering them refunds if they were, trying to take advantage of it. That's pretty uncommon. But if there's a user who, buys and refunds games repeatedly, we just stop giving that customer refunds. So it's really important to us that we're actually keeping an eye on this. Like I mentioned at the top, it's very expensive to us if customers, abuse the refund policy. So we're kind of invested in, keeping it honest and staying on it. And it's easy for us to see refund behavior from users and react. If a user was trying to manipulate the system, that's easy for us to keep an eye on. I think time-wise, I'm not sure where we're at. We might either need to wrap up, or maybe we can open back up to questions from the floor.
We're running out of the time, but I think we have a little time for last questions. So, because this guy waiting for you, his chance.
Hello, my name is Ugnius. I'm from a company called Shark. It's like a shark, but written with C. So I have a question about the Steam VR on macOS. As far as I know, you stopped supporting Mac operating system for Steam VR. And recently I heard the rumors that Apple is planning to launch their VR headset in upcoming February. So my question is if Valve is considering supporting again Mac OS for Steam for VR devices, are there any plans for that?
I don't know if either of us are familiar enough with the technical reasons why that support was canceled. I believe there's some limitations with Mac OS itself that was making it really hard for us to be able to maintain that integration. So I don't know if we have concrete plans to bring that back. I would say if more companies are launching VR headsets, that's great for you as a VR game developer. You have more kinds of devices that you can sell your game for. So I would encourage you to put your VR game in any kind of store, any VR store that's going to be able to help you reach customers.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Yep. Sorry, we don't have more info on that particular one.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. I think we're out of time for the day. I'm sorry, there were a ton of questions and I can see people raising their hands. I'm sure there are continue to be more questions. So I apologize that we didn't get a chance to chat with everybody here and answer all of your questions. I hope we'll have more opportunities like this in the future, and maybe next time we'll get to actually come visit your beautiful city in person.
Okay, nice. Thank you. It's very interesting and very helpful to us. So really, really thank you. And
Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it. Hope to see you again.